Everyone could take their seats, please. I call to order tonight's meeting of CUSD 201 Board of Education. The date is October 8th, 2013. Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Armstrong.
Here.
Ms. Caparelli.
Here.
Mrs. Charlton.
Here.
Mrs. Hancock.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mrs. Notbush.
Here.
Mr. Price.
Here.
We could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on the agenda is public comment. Are there any public comments? Okay, then the consent agenda. There is one small addition in your black folders. So are there any questions on that at all? Okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended. Number 1, personnel recommendations. Number 2, approval of student tour. Number 3, approval of amended board meeting schedule. And 4, resolution to dispose of district property.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Mrs. Notbush.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock.
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton.
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli.
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong.
Yes.
Okay, we will change the schedule just a bit. So our first discussion item will be the cell tower at Manning School.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike Bienick. I'm with a company called LCC Law. We represent AT&T Mobility. And what I'm going to do is I handle the zoning and permitting and some of the site acquisition end of it. And Courtney here, my colleague, handles the leasing end of the discussion. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what we're proposing to do. And then, you know, if there are questions and that, you can certainly ask us. But what we're proposing to do, AT&T is working on a series of infill sites. Basically, the network, as you, I'm sure, can tell, has been built out throughout this area. But what's happening is there's so much demand on the wireless and so much capacity issues that they're trying to infill some areas where the coverage is now lacking once again. The way the process works is AT&T gives us a search area. We go out and research that area, look for potential candidates, and then we report back to them. Their RF engineer then selects a site that they feel, based on our information, where would be an appropriate site. Initially I worked with Ms. Anderson on discussions about the possibility of going to the Manning School. And what we're proposing to do, since obviously we're not going to throw a regular cell tower out in the middle of your property, we had proposed to do what's called a flagpole. Essentially, it looks like a flagpole. It's a little bit broader, of course, because you have to run the equipment up through the interior of that pole. And at the top would be a flag, just like a normal flagpole. We're proposing to do a 100-foot tall pole. I don't know if have you seen the drawings of where we're looking?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It would be on the south end of the building. We were looking at, you do have the existing flagpole out front, but to replace that, the problem would be the fact that you would have to have the support equipment, and it obviously wouldn't look good in the front of the building. So what we did...
Excuse me. If you do have the drawings, it might be nice to put them up so that other people here
Certainly.
and the people watching from home.
Certainly, I will do that.
Thank you for that, Matt.
Get that out of the way. Yeah, this one will help the most, probably. Okay. Where we are looking at potentially going is the south side of the property, as I mentioned, over off of Norfolk Street. There's a side door over here And what we were proposing to do, it looked like there was a tree that was removed. I don't know how long ago that is. But basically, right where that little stump was is about where we would place the tower. And then off of the wall, we would build a little, looks 18.3 by 10-foot lease compound. Our equipment would be in there. And what we would do is design the wall to match the existing brick that's out there. It would go approximately up, or I believe at the same level as the windows, just below the window. So that's how it would tie into the building. The tower itself would not be fenced or anything. It would be out in the open since it's a flagpole. And all the cabling would run from the compound underground and up through the inside of the tower. The tower would have to be lit. That's federal regulations based on the fact that it has a flag on it. So that's just one piece of information. And that's basically what we are proposing. I've got some pictures that I was going to share with you real briefly. As you can see, this is the picture of that corner. What we are looking at doing is basically about here to here. That's where that retaining wall would come out from the building. The tower would sit over here. And then, as I mentioned, this is about 6-7 foot high. We would go up to the bottom of those windows, so those windows would not be blocked. And then finally, I've got a picture of this is an existing flagpole tower. It is in Niles, right off of Milwaukee and Oakton. This tower is just slightly taller. It is a 120-foot tower. There are currently 2 carriers on it. I know this because I actually did the zoning on this tower. And all the equipment is in this building here. Their Oasis Water Park is the site. They had a building that was there, and we just tied into that building, so it kind of matched the site. So basically, that's what we are proposing to do. At this point, if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. And
Do you have a picture of what is this unit that you're talking about? And
the
The
equipment?
box, the Argus box, is that what it's called?
No, it's equipment cabinets, and what they would do, I don't have a picture, but you would not see them from the outside. As I mentioned, they wouldn't be any higher than that wall, so you would not be able to see them.
It's 18 foot by 10 foot at its biggest?
Yes, that is correct.
And you would brick around on 2 sides or 3 sides?
It would be the 3 sides.
3 sides.
Right here is the building along here, and then the wall juts out here, around here, and then we would put the gates on the side closest to where the door is, so you wouldn't see it from the streets. You would see it from if you were inside the building at that door.
What about health or safety concerns about the, whatever you want to call it,
The
that it's
RF
emitting
emissions?
off of there?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, we operate under the FCC regulations. The FCC, the way the process works is each of the carriers bid on spectrum from the FCC, and it's within a certain broadband range. The FCC deems these to be safe ranges, therefore, that one of the reasons they operate on extremely low frequencies. Each of these antennas puts out approximately 100 watts of energy. And that's the reason you have so many cell towers. It's not a strong signal that goes out. It is kind of a muted signal. In fact, we operate at 0.1% of what the FCC allows. And there are countless schools that have these sites at them, not necessarily flagpoles. A lot of them have antennas mounted on the rooftop. We've got, AT&T has, gosh, I don't know how many contracts with the city of Chicago schools. Almost every school in the city has multiple carriers on it. So There have not been any issues related to any health-related issues as far as that goes.
Just wondering if you have roof-mounted antennas on all these other schools, why not a roof-mounted antenna here?
The height. The height is the issue. Your school is not tall enough for this. We do need the 100-foot height. One of the problems with the not so strong signal is the fact that foliage in buildings, the signal does not penetrate through them. So you have to get above that tree line. And with the school, it's not tall enough that it would get us that coverage.
But isn't an antenna on top of the school going to be 100 feet in the air, just like a 100-foot pole would be?
No, it would not be that, it wouldn't be high enough.
So have you already talked with the village as far as height and zoning and all that kind of stuff? Because obviously we don't control some of that.
Yes, I have. I met with Jill Ziegler, who's the village planner, about 2 months ago when we first started this project. And I sat down with her and went over what we're proposing, and she gave us all the zoning information and all that. It is something that we can apply for.
100 feet.
Yes.
Okay. Seems really tall in this little space over here.
You know,
you should put that picture up of the 120-foot one, and
Yeah,
that's quite a thing you're putting up there.
it is
in the
tall.
middle of our town.
There's no denying it's tall. But as a flagpole, it doesn't have that negative impact that a regular cell tower with the triangular platform would. You're not going to see the antenna. So it mutes it some, but yes, it is tall. There's no denying it. I've heard this said, and I've said it many times myself, a lot of cell towers, after a while, you don't even notice they're there. They kind of blend into the background. And I've had people approach me after meetings and say, yeah, you're right, I've seen that. So it's, it's not going to be invisible, but it's not a typical tower.
And is AT&T the only carrier on this tower? And you mentioned a couple of times that there are multiple carriers on all these other things you're talking about.
Not on all of them, but yeah. One of the things, the way the industry works is AT&T would at the onset be the only carrier. Once that tower is up there, other carriers will notice it. And in fact, we as consultants for AT&T do work for other carriers. We now know, if and when this is built and approved, hey, Verizon calls us up and says, we've got all these search areas, we want you to go look. We're going to go right there. We know exactly where this tower is. And that's real common in the industry. There's X number of consulting firms that do this work. We know where these towers are. We know what to look for. Our first objective when we scrub, it's called scrubbing a search ring, is to look for existing structures. That's the course of least resistance. I wouldn't have to be here this evening if there was an existing tower from another company, and in many cases, I wouldn't have to go to a zoning hearing. It's a permitted use, so I could just come in, tell the company that owned the tower, we're looking at co-locating, we follow through with an application form, done. So that is always the first objective. So other carriers will see this tower, and I'm not guaranteeing there would be co-location, but it would be an opportunity.
Would they lease it then from AT&T?
That is all how you set up your lease.
How we set up this lease, is that what you're
It's a
saying?
negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said we, I'm just trying to make sure I understand who we is.
No.
Is we.
Yeah,
No.
it would be who the leasing party is. So you guys are currently leasing the property to AT&T for the tower. So it would be how you would work the lease with AT&T in terms of whether they would work with you to co-locate, or if you would just let AT&T decide if they want to let somebody else co-locate.
What's generally more common? That once AT&T does it, then they work with? Or is it more common for the leasing body to stay?
In
I'm
my
sure I'm not
experience, it
following you.
goes. In my experience, it goes either way. It really just kind of depends on who you're working with and how much involvement you really want to have with the process. If you want to go through this again with another carrier, in the future, then, that would be up to you. But if you want to let AT&T handle it since they've been doing it for a while, then
So
that's
what-
the other way.
Well,
But it's kind of 50-50 as far as.
And I could tell you at the very, very minimum, based on the way this site is laid out, you would at the very least be negotiating another ground lease with somebody.
They would
because-
need more space to put more ground equipment.
I see.
So,
What,
so you could.
Go ahead.
You could split it, is what you could do.
So one of the reasons I'm asking, or primary reason about that particular question is, as far as insurance and liability goes, so you're putting a 100-foot tower right next to our school, there's trees there, there certainly have been weather instances lately that can compromise a structure that size, even with it being that thin. On the onset of this, if we were to do it, obviously AT&T is responsible, but what kind of, guarantees do we have that if that thing blows over and, pops a hole in our gym roof, I mean, that's.
They do take out liability insurance throughout the terms of the lease.
So then what happens when you have another carrier that comes in? So now they have shared.
Same thing.
They would provide their insurance as well.
Yeah. So you would have two carriers providing insurance for the equipment that's on your property.
And same thing if somebody climbs the little gate and gets in there and hurts themselves and,
Correct.
I mean, that, because we could be named in any suit that's brought, in anything related to that, even if
Understood,
every
right.
clause,
Definitely.
legal clause in the
Sure.
world is not gonna stop somebody from naming our district in a legal way.
Understood.
Sure, right. That's not going to stop them from naming you, but what it will do is when it does actually get to court or get in front of a judge, they'll be able to say that you can't be named because of the provisions in your lease.
So the provisions account for counsel to protect us without us having to pay our own attorney to be there.
I don't know off the top of my head what the draft lease says. I've sent over a draft lease. I don't know if you guys have looked at it yet. I don't know what the language as a default says, but it is a template. It's just where AT&T starts. So, I have the lease. I can look at it in a minute if you'd like, but we can make sure, or we can at least talk about what kind of indemnity provisions you guys
Right.
would like so that AT&T would be responsible for the lawsuit if that were to happen and that you guys wouldn't.
And there are safety, obviously, you don't want people climbing in there, getting in our equipment, nor does
Does
AT&T.
AT&T.
So what they do is their equipment is monitored back to what's called a switch. It's a main building. There's probably 3 or 4 switches in the Chicago area. And what they do, if somebody breached the equipment, got into that equipment area, an alarm would sound at this switch, and then obviously they would call the police. So there would be someone, it is kind of monitored in that sense. As far as the tower goes, it doesn't have all the climbing pegs or anything like that, so a kid can't just get out there and start having fun going up the tower, so.
And the flag doesn't come down at night, it stays up 24/7?
Correct, that's why it's lit.
Can I ask another question, please, more aesthetically? Why are we not locating the flagpole where the current flagpole is and changing that pole location there and just run the ground wire around the corner to the box?
Well, that was something I had mentioned earlier, was about, by putting it in the front, you'd have to put the equipment somewhere in relative close proximity.
How close does the equipment have to be?
You typically want it to be near the base of the tower, because what happens is you have signal loss the longer your lines go. So it needs to be in relative proximity within like 20, 25 feet. So I don't know that you'd want it on the front of your building because of the equipment.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that a 100-foot pole on the side of the building is gonna look right.
Well, and one of the reasons that we had originally selected this portion of the property was the fact that the bank and the more commercial areas were on that side of the building. And the village also agreed that that might be a
Sure, but
preference.
all the kids come out of school there, all the bus students are dropped off there. At the end of the day, the kids come out of that door right there, you called it a side door. That's a very heavily trafficked area for kids every day that we're in school.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Do you know what the distance is from the wall to the sidewalk? The grassy area? How many feet is that, do you know?
Looking at the scale, probably about 25 feet.
25.
And 10 feet of that will be taken up with the box?
Correct.
That's a big area.
Thank you.
Okay, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, I have three kind of things. First of all, I first have to say thank you for bringing this to the board, because even with the estimate of what the district would receive in rent, I love to hear about ideas of how to bring income. However, two questions. Number one, if we go through with our, and this isn't really a question for you guys, but if we go through with our planning, our building structure, wouldn't this be right in the way?
No,
Yeah, I don't know that we would
I don't think we're doing anything on that
look
side.
that would
We're not?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
approach on that.
So I guess the thing that probably bothers me the most, and Gary talked about it, so I really, ever since I heard about this, I've been kind of thinking about it, and I just kind of did my own research. And with all due respect, we have in front of us some, people from the AT&T. So I did some research, and I do have some real strong concerns about the safety, particularly following up with something that Gary said, is that everything that I'm seeing, they really talk about what is the hotspot and, keeping people maybe 400 meters away. Some of the things I talked about is that while, industry spokespeople will assert that there's no risk, that scientists say that at the very least that there's no assurances that can be given. And again, I looked at my own research and looked at different things, and I, for one, feel that I feel very strongly about, I would like to know from someone other than AT&T where exactly hotspots are, where any kind of radiation of any kind would be. Because, again, as I say, I wouldn't even think to deal with money for our district if in any way it is hazardous to our children. One of the things that I was looking at was about the long-term effects, and they just don't know, and that probably scares me more than anything. And the question is, should we expose our children and ourselves to this radiation for the next 20 years or so? How many? 10 years, when so much uncertainty exists. And I did read a lot of things about the RF and the high intensity and the numbers and all that, but the thermal effect. But I just feel, it just doesn't feel right to me to do this on a school property. I can certainly see your perspective. I've been on my phone and I hear people, I can't hear you right now and everything, but I just really would like to hear from somebody who can give us some scientific assurances that there is no radiation of any kind anywhere coming from these towers.
I can provide you with studies if you'd like. The FCC has done their own research, and that's where, the licenses come from. They would not have issued them if we did not meet that threshold.
And that's my concern, is there's thresholds and then there's thresholds.
No, we're like at 1/100th of that threshold. I mean, it's minimal. And the quote-unquote hotspots that you're referring to is essentially, if this was the antenna and I'm standing here, that's where you get some of the effect from the antenna. But you also have to remember you're 180 feet below that, so it would dissipate. These antennas put off, like I said, 100 watts of power, so it's not a significant amount of energy that's coming out of these antennas. It's not like it's, in fact, you're worse off standing in front of a microwave than you would be.
I read
Standing
all
on
of
the
that too,
site.
and they say, don't use your cell phones either, because you're gonna get cancer in
That's
your
where,
ears and
exactly,
stuff.
that's, your cell phone to your ear is much more dangerous than being
Well,
on site with the.
And again, with all due respect, from where, at least I'm speaking on behalf of myself, from where I sit, I would rather get information from a non-telecommunications industry.
Well, like I
person.
said, I can provide you with information, links to information. There's a study that I've seen from a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Mulder. He's from the University of Wisconsin. I don't know if it's Madison or Milwaukee, but he's done extensive research on RF emissions and so forth and so on, and he's not associated with the industry at all. I can provide you with that link. I can provide you with links to the FCC, well, obviously you can't do that now, but they have studies as well. So,
I did a Google search today, and on the first page, there were talks about physicians at Boston and Harvard universities calling cell phone towers a radiation hazard and things like that. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't profess to be one. It's just the things that I see in front of me. There's actually a story about a school district that was told there was no radiation, and it turned out that there was. So I'm just one person saying this, that, I would, as long as, we're not voting on it tonight, I would like to see some independent studies as to what the hazards, if any, are to our students. Because
you'd like,
to
I
me,
can
it's not worth the money that we get if there's any hazards to our students, because
totally agree.
otherwise, I would virtually ask you to go back to the village and see if there's someplace else.
I totally
So,
understand your point.
That's my concern.
So you mentioned that in the drawing show, the actual antennas are going to be 85 feet and 95 feet off the ground.
That's the center line.
And so the actual emission from these, from what I read, it goes horizontal to the...
It's conical. It's a conical
Okay.
shape. The antennas, if you were looking at this thing as being an antenna, it would go out the front in a conical shape.
So it goes
It only
out
goes
one
out-
side of the antenna.
Right, it only comes out the front. There's what's called an omnidirectional antenna, which you see on some towers. They're the thin whip-looking antennas. Those are usually your police and fire. That goes in all 360. That's why if you look at a cell tower, they're triangular platforms. They got 3 antennas on each side. That's because they're broadcasting in those 3 sectors. And they're, because it is conical, it kind of flows out like that, and like that, up and down.
And so what direction would these be?
What you'd have is 6 antennas, 3 per level, because like you said, there was the 95 and the 85-foot level. That gets AT&T their 6 antennas. There would be 1 per sector.
Okay. So it would go all the way around?
1 per level per sector. So that would
Those
be-
heights, though, starting at 85.
and 95.
Correct.
Does it buzz or hum or make any noise?
No. The only potential noise, but this is outdoor, on a cell site is when you have an equipment shelter, the buildings that you see, they put air conditioner units on there because the equipment runs very hot.
Because we have I don't know, it's not that, but there's some box, on a corner near us, and it's not really pretty, and it does make a lot of noise.
No, this makes absolutely no noise.
And then how about to touch it, the pole? What if
Just a normal metal pole.
they won't get any shocks or anything?
No, in fact, as far as shocking and that goes, cell towers are probably one of the safest places to be in a thunderstorm because they're grounded.
Oh.
It's going to hit the top of the tower and go right down into the ground. So ironically, that's one of the safest places to be under a metal structure like that. So,
I think you already answered this, but I don't recall. How high is that box, the shed?
It's about 6 feet is what it looks like from the ground to the bottom of the window.
Okay.
So wherever that bottom level is of that window is how tall that would be.
And it does have a roof, yes?
Yeah, it would.
no, it's not.
No,
It's
So
gonna
it's
be
just like a
open.
wall? It's like a...
Correct.
Okay.
That way, the equipment doesn't get too hot, so we wouldn't have to worry about any air conditioners in the
Making
noise.
Yep.
Okay. And the antenna, like you say, they're totally camouflaged as part of the pole, and if more are added, those also look like just to be part of the pole. There's nothing like
Right.
outside of it.
The way a flagpole works is the whole bottom part of the tower is metal, And then up at the top, it's fiberglass inserts that the antennas sit, there's like a mini pole inside the pole, and the antennas flush up to that, and then they put the mesh over it because it has to be a fiberglass, otherwise the signal does not propagate out. So what they do is they design the tower to allow for those other slots.
And there are companies that specialize in these stealth designs so that they know what they need to do in order to make sure the antennas still work, but you won't be able to see them, so.
Sure. Okay, another thought, just in terms of the area use. I mean, I know they do take the gym class out in that area, and they use that open area for some things. I just don't know how much this cuts into it.
Yeah, I don't know how much they use that space.
Okay, I've seen every once in a while I go by and the class out there and they're playing games or stretching or whatever. So I just know it gets some use. So the area usage is one of the concerns. The aesthetics, like I say, the pool, I'm not really concerned. There's some concerns. There's definitely some concerns about the box and what could be done to not make it look. I like the idea that it's blended with the wall. You know, if you're using the same kind of brick and stuff like that. But still, there's some concerns about. There's the PTO has a beautification group, and they're working on making things look better. This seems contrary to that offhand. So there's real concerns about what we can do with it. I think that's going to come into play with any kind of proposal we can do. Just kind of what can we do with it? I mean, it's not our box. Can we put things on it? Can we, I don't know, whether it's planters or whatever around it or something like that.
Well, we can definitely, when we went out there, the landscape is in real great condition right now. But that's something that can be addressed as part of the lease, that the area be landscaped with X number of dollars worth of stuff. And typically what we'll do, the best solution, since it would be on your grounds, would be that AT&T would probably, as part of the lease negotiation, give you X number of dollars to put
To
in
do
the
the
landscaping
landscaping
you
yourself.
want.
Okay.
That way, you do what you want, you're gonna be maintaining it and so forth and so on, so you get exactly what you want.
And as
That's-
long as it's outside those walls that are built to match the building, you should mostly be free to do what you want, plant, add bushes or anything like that, so.
Okay. Then, of course, and let me just say from the safety aspect, because that, when, I think we're coming up on almost 10 years ago now that they put in the cell tower at the high school. And I live in the neighborhood around the high school, and that was, out of 457 homes, 456 of them signed a petition that they did not want cell towers going in there, and they went in anyway. What I found, there was a lot of research done by a lot of people at that point in time about the safety. And what it kind of came out to is that it just seemed like people are going to find whatever they want to find because there's such strong arguments on both sides, and there's so much evidence on both sides. And the biggest argument, it's hard to say what isn't there. It's easy to prove if something is there, but if it isn't there, it's hard to prove. So there's a lot of roadblock. At the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of the people are more concerned with the aesthetics than of the actual health threat.
And the light.
But it is a difficult thing to research. A lot of stuff came out of Europe and things like that, and what they're doing over there. But that's worth looking into. That is definitely my biggest concern. Also, I've just found that it's challenging to look into.
So Matt kind of brings up a good point that we haven't really asked yet, which is about the neighbors. We're not just in the business district, we're also
Fully understand.
in the neighborhood as well, and I'm glad that you've talked with the village, but I'm curious if there's been any discussions or survey or
No.
anything at all, just the people that live
No,
within 100 feet of that corner.
Because it would be a moot point, and we would just be kicking a hornet's nest if you guys said, bye-bye.
Right.
We don't want to go down that road until we researched with the village and researched with you guys if you're even
That is
interested.
something we're gonna pursue, yeah.
And as a part of the zoning, we are required to notify, I believe it's 250 feet around, so they would get their notices. They would be obviously invited to the public hearings, and everything that we file with the village is public record, so they're more than welcome to explore, that information once we file the application.
Who holds the public hearings?
The village.
The village.
The village holds a public hearing
Yes.
on our property?
They would have a zoning hearing.
Zoning.
Yeah, zoning.
Right, the zoning here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, what we found is the people with the aesthetics, it was really because I want the high school looks like a cell tower. It's got lights on it, but it looks like a cell tower. And the concern there, aside from appearance, which the flagpole, I think, in itself kind of alleviates that, aside from the height, but it is still a flagpole and it's not bad looking. I think the other thing is just the perceived threat. Whether or not it is a health hazard, if people view it as a health hazard, then that has an impact on home values. This doesn't look like a cell tower, so I don't think it's going to have that kind of concern for the neighbors.
And, you know, I, just to follow up on that, I do know that there were, you know, it's not long ago that this happened in our district, and I know there was a lot of discussion about it, and obviously I know a lot of it was tied in with the lights, you know, for the neighbors. But I mean, I've stated my thing, but I do have one more question. So this box that's outside, you say you can't cover it because of the heat?
Correct.
So.
I mean,
am
we could probably explore some avenue if that's something that was a critical issue. We could certainly do
Look into it.
something. We've done other sites like this. The village of Deerfield, we're right outside their police station, and we have one that's similar. It's open to the air. We could even build the wall taller if that was
No, my
required.
point is, I think the gym windows are right
Exactly.
there,
behind
and
that.
there's no air in that gym, and so it's already kind of warm.
And that's why we tried to keep the shelter down to that height so that we weren't obstructing those windows. We could certainly enclose it. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility, certainly.
Well, I mean, I've already stated what I think, but can I ask another question? How many schools have you installed these at?
Me personally, the industry, well, like I mentioned
Schools.
earlier, CPS, we've got almost a standing agreement with them. Almost every school has one in the city. I've seen a light standard at Wheeling High School. As you stated, the high school here in town schools are really good locations especially high schools, because you have light standards. That seems to be the big thing nowadays, to stealth them and replace light standards. So they're at a lot of schools, a lot.
But those schools have mainly the cell towers, not the flag poles like this, right?
No, they're light standards, a lot of them.
Right, so they're away from the buildings is what I'm driving at.
In those cases, yeah, but they're also right there on the
But on
football
CPS,
field.
they're on the rooftops.
Yeah, and most of those are rooftops because those buildings are taller. They're 4 or 5 stories. And the more urban you get, like Chicago, the closer your cell sites get, so you don't need as much height. So that's why a lot of the rooftops, they use smokestacks and stuff like that on a lot of the CPS buildings.
Will this improve service right in that area, like in the school?
Totally, both.
I'm thinking of, you know, we've had a lot of discussions about school safety and all of that, and making sure that we have, you know, good access for cellular service for our teachers and administrators in the event of an emergency in the building is kind of a consideration, in my opinion, that we shouldn't overlook. The other thing, are there other towers that you know of in the area, downtown area, that?
Not in this proximity.
Okay.
AT&T has other towers that are surrounding the area, but this is a hole right in the middle of where those towers are.
Okay.
When I did the initial search, one of the places I looked was the fire station. Village property is always a good place to go if there's no towers. The fire station was too far north because there were a couple other sites there. What happens, unfortunately, these networks operate on a grid pattern, so you kind of have to follow the grid. You can't just slide things north or south or east or west, because what happens is then you leave coverage gaps on the one side, and then you get interference on the other side. So it kind of almost has to work as close to the central point between the other sites, and this is right in that middle.
So will this improve service for AT&T users or all users? Forgive my ignorance on the
No,
whole
no,
cell.
that's not an ignorant question. Primarily it would, increase AT&T users, and it also includes the Wi-Fi. It'll upgrade that, because what happens is, most of the towers, when they were originally built, we didn't have all the data. So it was only cell calls. That was all you used your phone for.
Right.
Nowadays, your kids, I've got 3 daughters, they're always Googling this, Googling that, texting someone. It increases the ability to do that as well. It enhances that. Now, as far as the other carriers, they all have roaming agreements with one another. It won't completely enhance their coverage, but you as a Sprint, Verizon, whatever user would have better coverage. But if Sprint, Verizon, or whomever went on the tower, it would be better and better, you know. It would-
So do we know if there's a deficiency at all at Manning right now? I mean, obviously not in the car line, since that's illegal.
I think is it the lower level, Mike? That there's some problems with signal strength.
Okay, and then I just want to go back to the AT&T agreement. And if you guys lease to another, to Verizon, let's say, would they have to add additional equipment out there? They would.
Yes.
So that, we cover all that in our contract with you. You lease to Verizon, and then do you have to come back to us and ask permission to put another box out there?
What would happen is, in this case, typically what happens on a regular cell site out in the middle of a farm field, that AT&T would lease a big enough chunk of land that
We could then lease to other carriers.
to other carriers.
So we would sign one lease with the property owner, and it would be a huge, like,
50 by 50,
50, yeah.
75 by 75.
100 by 100
They'd
piece
be
of
able to go
land.
right inside that, no problem.
So
In
you would
this
lease
case-
that much?
No,
Okay.
that's what I was getting at. In this case, however, we are going to be leasing the 18.3 by 10. That would be it. And when the next carrier came along and said, we want to go on that tower, they would have to lease that additional ground space or some space from you to do their
They would
installation.
have to get approval from you, as well as from AT&T, before they could go on the tower.
So we wouldn't necessarily negotiate a lease with AT&T that would allow you guys, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit unclear, there's a disconnect.
Sure.
Either the lease is for X amount of space with AT&T, and then we talk to Verizon, or
Correct.
that's the only option.
You would
So, well,
negotiate
here.
the ground space.
Yeah, there's 2 different kinds of leases. There's a
Kind of
ground-
tricky.
There's a ground space lease where which is what we're talking about here, we negotiate with you the space on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
We want to lease from you that 10 by 18 piece of property. And then AT&T would deal with other carriers on their tower, because the tower itself would be AT&T's. We would just be leasing the space to put the tower from you guys. And then the other half of it is that if somebody else came along and wanted to go on that tower, we would work with the carrier to put the antennas up, because the tower is AT&T's.
That would be leased between
Okay.
AT&T and
But
said
you
carrier.
would have a lease with Verizon
For the
or
ground.
Sprint or T-Mobile for any additional ground space
Got
they
it.
might need to add extra boxes or cables or anything like that.
Got it.
So
Okay.
what ends up happening is most villages will have a lease with pretty much every carrier when this is all said and done, in terms of ground space, because you'll have to negotiate that ground space and what they're gonna pay you for that ground space every time somebody else wants to put equipment on the ground.
Is it AT&T's hope that someone else jumps on this antenna?
Sure. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not their goal. They don't go out scouting. There are companies in the industry that are
just
tower
own towers.
owners and managers.
Mm-hmm.
They actively go out and seek other carriers to go on. In the case of AT&T, each carrier has a co-location department that handles, processes all those requests. As I said, we're consultants. If we came through and T-Mobile wanted a site in this area, we would know how to maneuver through the process of getting them to co-locate on this tower, if that was something to do.
But no, the goal isn't really to let other companies also be on the tower. The goal is to put coverage in for AT&T customers. That's the primary goal.
But like you said,
If somebody
They-
comes through and wants to, you know,
Right.
it's not necessarily a negative thing for AT&T to share
and once it
space.
goes up, everybody knows it's up there, and they're gonna be,
Right. We consultants know what how it looks
Well,
like
that also
and
depends
what to look for.
That also depends on the kinds of holes in coverage that the other carriers have. They may not have, the way that their towers are spaced here may be different, so they may not have to go
Right.
on that flagpole. I couldn't tell you, we haven't done that research, but, you know, their coverage isn't the same as AT&T, so not every carrier may need to come out there and put antennas on that tower, or nobody might have to. I mean, I couldn't tell you for sure, but it really just depends on what the other companies need to do in terms of filling in their gaps in coverage in the area too, so.
And then how long does the install take?
About 3 weeks. The biggest time is putting in your pylon, or the caisson into the ground, because you've got so much concrete. Depends on the soils, how far they have to go down. Usually it's about 20, 30 feet, so.
It's clay.
So it depends on how stable that soil is as to how far they have to go down, but that's the biggest time. And then once they get that in place, it's stacking the tower. It's pretty quick.
Thanks.
And is there ever a scenario where the leasing body would actually be the owner of the tower? I mean, why would we give you our ground rights and then nothing there belongs to us?
Absolutely. We've had situations, but I don't know that you guys would want to do that.
Yeah.
Simply
You'd be
because
taking over the liability for the tower if that's what you wanted to do.
liability and all the liability for the regulatory filings that we have to
You'd be
do.
responsible for all of that, so that's why most people do it this way, is because then AT&T is responsible for the FCC and all the regulations, and the liability in terms of if something were to happen, which is, you know, like we talked about earlier, it's kind of rare, but just in case, you guys wouldn't want to be the body holding the liability insurance on that, you would want AT&T to do it. So it's possible, it's happened before, but most places, especially villages, don't want that kind of risk, so.
And one more question. So let's say this was done and someone else came in. So would someone else want an 18 by 3 by 10 spot as well?
Can't speak to that because everybody has different equipment. It would be probably similar in size.
So if Verizon came and, I don't know who else we have. So if we had 3 other people that came.
You likely wouldn't have too many more carriers
Right,
because of the
limited
height.
space.
And, yeah, both factors, the limited height and the space. Because, as we
much-
talked about in the flagpole, AT&T is already taking up 2 spots because of the limited place to put the antennas. The next carrier would do the same, so they're talking 75 and 65, and you got trees,
Yeah,
as I said
You couldn't go much
earlier.
lower on that tower and make it efficient, so you're really probably looking at 1, maybe 2, maybe, being interested, or being able, like even being feasible for them to co-locate on that tower, but, I mean, a safe.
And not to be argumentative, but it's just that I just want to make sure that for anyone who's watching, that we are having this conversation
Sure.
with
Oh, of course.
representatives from
Happy to answer
AT&T, and
questions.
so we have to know everything.
Yep.
So, you know, that does, I mean, I think Matt brought up a good question. I have seen kids, you know, out there for gym and stuff, so if there's other spots that need
Well,
to
and
go.
When it comes to co-location, like we talked about the leasing and it being kind of split between you and AT&T, if they can't get the necessary ground space lease from you guys, then there's no point in them putting antennas on the tower because they need their equipment on the ground in order for those antennas to work. So really, if you were going to allow anybody else to co-locate, that's up to you guys. That's kind of in your hands after, if you were to allow us to do it and put our equipment there and put that flagpole up, in the future, it's up to you guys if you want to give up more space or not. And then usually when they do co-locations with other companies, there's an option where they clearly state that if there's no room or they can't get the necessary approvals from the owner or the government bodies or anything like that, then they just move on to the next site. So, you know, if you're only comfortable with one for now, and then in the future you can revisit whether you want to add more or not, that's kind of in your hands and up to you.
And
So-
to expand on that, I had a thought while we were discussing all this. A scenario that we've done at, I believe it's Evanston High School. We put a tower and we put the equipment on the rooftop. That's also a possibility. We could put the wall to mimic the wall here and put all the equipment up there. Carrier number 2 could also do the same. So that might be something that we don't impinge on the ground space that you're concerned about. We'd only have the pole sitting here, and then the equipment could go here, or even possibly here. We could run, you've got the metal coverings that are there. We could do something similar to that. That's a possibility. That would save all your ground space. And
What is that little space? Is that just a stairwell or an exit space? What is that, Kevin, or somebody who knows Manning better than I do?
It's the
That's
the gym teacher's office and a bathroom.
An office, bathrooms,
Like an
office, that's what that is?
Yeah.
Used to be
Yeah.
locker
Storage.
rooms.
And
mainly,
we
right?
would do, we would do all the necessary structural analysis to make sure that the building was safe to put more weight on top of it before, we went ahead and did that. And so
This is the oldest end of the building, right? And
Yes.
it gets
Yes.
newer as you go the other way?
Yep.
Right, okay.
But that's an option. If
Yeah.
the ground space was an issue.
or if you wanted to go above on the next level of that building, instead of on that office, you could go on the higher part of that building too. So there are options in terms of where you want to put the equipment.
From an aesthetics and scalability standpoint, that seems far better to me.
Yeah,
But-
on the roof of the lower part, I
Yeah.
think. As far as electricity goes, what's the electricity draw on this? And are you on our grid or how,
It's a
kinda?
200 amp. We tie into the Comet. Up behind the school, it would be, let's see, that would be the west side of the building. There's a transformer out there. We would tie into that.
Okay,
And we only require a 200 amp service.
okay. So it's like a house,
Mhm.
right? So is all this discussion about lease of property something that's supposed to be closed session, or is this all open?
This part of the discussion is open, but then, when you actually get down to reviewing the lease
Terms,
agreement and
actual
getting to the terms, that can be done in closed.
So what are you asking of us tonight?
Well, I think, asking questions of the reps, and then I know one of the things that Kim and I can work on as well. I know there's some concern about the radiation, and so we can also possibly, talk to Steve Cashman a little bit about that piece, and then also if the board wants to consider location of the equipment and other, on the building and so forth, I think, again, that's something that we would include Mike Maros in that conversation, and also Steve Cashman as well, to see the plausibility of something like that, so.
Okay, so so that would be at either the next meeting or the.
Right, we'd bring that information back and then continue the conversation. At some point in time, we'd need, consensus from the board to sit down and formally negotiate that agreement.
I guess it's also worth saying out loud, kind of like Joel's point about there is some benefit for the school. Obviously, for the downtown business district, anybody using AT&T as a carrier would have a benefit for Wi-Fi and all. I mean, since we are, right on the back door of the business district too. And there's certainly something for us to consider as well as.
Having said that, I don't know if I can ask this question, but have you talked to the bank, which is right across the street? and
We
not-
talked to whom, I'm
The
sorry?
bank?
No, we haven't. We like, if given the opportunity to work with a school or a municipal site, that's much more preferable. Banks tend to be very difficult to deal with because you have so much corporate up the ladder, and the bank, what's Bank of America, they might not even be headquartered out of here, so you're dealing with someone out in New
Delaware
York or wherever. So it tends to be kind of an uphill battle. Whereas when you deal with a municipality or a school district, it's we view it as a win-win because we're getting our coverage and you as a taxing body are getting the revenue that, can help you do things that, obviously we're all government entities and schools and so forth are tight budgets right now. So that's why we really looked at this as a prime opportunity for us.
I just have to say, the one thing that I have, and it just seems probably so not worth mentioning, but there was something about pulling up in front of the school and seeing the flag being raised and the flag being lowered at the end of the day. And, you know, if somebody goes out there to raise the flag now, they'll be coming back on Tuesday afternoon. You know, it's 100 feet. It doesn't come up, it doesn't go up, it doesn't come down. And, you know, that was a privilege for these kids, you know, to be able to go out and raise and lower the flag. And, you know, it may seem like it's not a big deal, but it is to the kids, I think, and it is to me. So, you know, I
Well,
just
it
think
wouldn't
it
be-
bears mentioning.
We wouldn't be replacing your existing flagpole, that you would still have that opportunity.
No, you would be
So-
replacing the raising and the lowering of the flag.
You could, I've seen them done that way, but it becomes kind of an issue because of the equipment that's up there and.
No doubt.
And that's such a long cord that.
Way to go.
Yeah.
Tangling and so forth and
Yeah.
so on. So
Yep.
that's why typically they don't do
They're
that.
stationary, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to put it out there.
No, that's a very, very valid point.
Any other questions? Okay, so I know, I just wanted to follow our own board policy, because I asked for independent studies, and I guess I want to ask the rest of the board if that's okay if we get some of those.
I'm fine with that.
I'm too.
Would you like me to provide you with the?
I'm looking
Okay.
for our district.
Okay.
To get that to us and stuff, so, okay. But just following
Sure.
our board policy and stuff.
Well, Maria, I think he can send, I mean, you're just
You
talking
can
about sending
certainly-
links.
Oh, yeah.
Link.
You know,
Yes.
just- I'd be happy to
Yes.
receive the links
Yeah.
that he has.
Yeah, I'm not-
looking to give you studies that
That
you,
AT&T
you
did
could
or-
see as
yeah.
possibly being tainted or something
Yeah.
like that. No.
I just want to make sure that when we make a decision, we have, you know,
Totally understand that.
all sides.
Totally understand.
Yes, I didn't mean to, you know, be combative or anything, so.
No, because we don't trust you. Oh, no.
Okay, so is there anything else on that?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you, guys.
much. And if
Thank
there's
you.
other questions, by all means, let me know, and
Yeah.
we'll be glad to
Yep.
address them for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then the next item on the agenda, go back to capital project funding options. Ms. Hennessy?
Thank you very much.
Passing them down, huh?
Still on.
Some more to pass down.
Thanks. I think we've got them already. It should be, yes.
Thanks for having me back. I want to introduce my associate Liberty Zegan is here tonight with me, and she's works on a lot of these numbers. So here we go. First of all, I've got some good news on
Would
the.
you just introduce yourself in
Oh,
case
I'm so
someone?
sorry. Elizabeth Hennessy with William Blair. And,
Thank you.
thanks. So this is information on capital financing options in our preliminary discussion. And start, as I usually do, with our market update. And since the Fed decided not to reduce its quantitative easing, we had rates come down a bit. So you can see the blue line is our 20-year MMD, and you can see that kind of sharp decrease at the end, and the green line is our 10-year. So we had a sharp decrease in that too in the last couple of weeks. And here's our yield curve, and the green line is where we are now, and this shows interest rates from years 1 through 30. And I don't know if you remember last time I was here, but that yield curve was very steep, and it's flattened out a little bit, thankfully, to this kind of new news that the Fed feels the government is not, or the economy is not strong enough to sustain them reducing that quantitative easing stimulus that they're doing. So that's good news for us. Okay. First of all, just to outline what we're going to talk about tonight, after our last meeting, we talked about coming back with $24 million as the par amount of the options. And the 3 or 4 options I'm going to take you through tonight involve, firstly, paying for the $24 million improvements through a combination of TIF revenues that you would get from your agreement with the village and operating revenues. Secondly, looking at limited tax bonds, like the bonds we did for life safety. How could you use that source and extend that debt to help pay towards that $24 million? Then third and fourth, we have 2 referendum options to look at, okay? So this first slide talks about the agreement with the Central Downtown TIF Increment Financing District of the Village to provide you with up to $15 million over the life of the TIF, equal to 25% of the increment. Okay, so $15 million is great, and you know it goes a long ways towards helping pay debt. The problem is we have no idea when those revenues are going to come in. They're dependent on the success of the TIF and when they start generating enough revenues to start giving you distributions. So what that means, if you're to follow an option that use your operating revenue and the TIF, you have to pretty much plan on using operating revenues only. So you're ready to cover that debt service without planning on when that TIF revenue will be available. So the type of bonds that we're looking at are called alternate bonds. So these bonds have 2 sources of revenue. The first source would be the operating revenues of the district, okay? And those could come from the O&M fund, it could come from general state aid, corporate personal property replacement tax, any unrestricted revenue to the district. It could not come from restricted funds such as transportation or IMRF. The second source of revenue committed to alternate bonds would be an unlimited general obligation tax on the debt service fund. And each year, as your revenues from that primary source become available, the O&M revenues or the pledged revenues within your general funds and supplemented by any TIF revenues, you would abate the debt service levy. Okay, so each year you have an abatement. So in order to issue alternate bonds, you have to go through a petition period and a public hearing process. Okay, so here's option 1, 24 million alternate bonds, and we're amortize them over 23 years to match the life of the TIF. So going from the left side, we've got your levy year and estimated TIF revenue based on some of the village information. Then 25% of that TIF revenue per year up to $15 million, and that happens in 2018 through 2029. The middle column is the debt service you would have to pay on $24 million. And we've structured it as level debt service over 23 years. So you can see the payments are about that $1.9 million a year. So that's the amount you would have to be able to fit within your current operating budget to pay for the debt service year over year. Then we go to capitalized interest, which is using a portion of bond proceeds to help pay interest in that first year. And then we see surplus shortfall. So obviously you're paying the whole amount until the TIF revenues start to come in. Then you're paying less. So, you know, from 2018 through 2029, you'd be paying, you know, anywhere from a couple $100,000 to $800,000. And then At the end, you would also pay the 1.9 million. And this is assuming these TIF revenues come in the middle of the schedule. If there's a delay in getting the downtown TIF up off the ground, it could be later. So, but the length of the TIF is 23 years. That's why we make the bonds 23 years. So this option could work if you had that budgetary flexibility. I'm not sure that you do. So that's the biggest drawback to this option. So the advantage, no referendum is required. The TIF payments will offset some of the debt service expense. The disadvantage is that you have to come up within your operating budget 1.9 million per year to make the debt service payments for the next 23 years. And of course, the other disadvantage is that you cannot predict the timing or receipt of the TIF revenues. So therefore, you have to budget the full debt service payments. Okay, option 2 is a combination. Last time we talked about limited bonds, and if you were to go issue more limited bonds payable from that debt service extension base, that's part of the debt service levy, limited by the tax cap that we used for the life safety bonds last year. If you were to extend that over 20 years, you could get $12.7 million for that. So in this option, we've combined that $12.7 million non-referendum limited bonds with $11.3 million alternate bonds, okay, paid from the operating funds. So if you go to the next page, and sorry, there's a lot of numbers here, but starting from the left, we've got the EAV, the debt service extension base, which in 2013 is about $1,254,000. We're looking at about a 1.9 CPI in 2014 right now, and we're assuming 1.5% after that. Then we've got your outstanding non-referendum debt service that we issued last year. Then we have the proposed $12.7 million 2015 limited debt service. And by the way, we've set all these options as if they were to happen in spring of 2015, just to be consistent. By the time, whether you go the referendum route or the regular operating fund route, we're just trying to be consistent in starting this in spring of 2015. Now, in order to issue bonds in 2015 paid from the debt base, you have to refund a portion of those bonds you issued because, as you can see, the existing bonds go out to 2019. So when we combine the refunding, that provides the $12.7 million. This does take you out the maximum statutory repayment schedule, which is 20 years. So you wouldn't really have much flexibility to issue more limited bonds if you were to follow this route. Now, the nice thing about it, though, is that it doesn't really increase your bond debt service payments or tax rate except for CPI. And you can see the tax rate stays pretty stable around 33 cents over the life of the debt. So this gets you $12.7 million. You'd have to supplement this with $11.3 million of alternate bonds. So that repayment is shown on this page. We start with your estimated TIF revenues up to $15 million. And if we pay this $11.3 million off over 23 years, your annual payments are about $909,000. So you can see this works a little better. Your net additional debt service is about $4.3 million over the $15 million. So the amount you have to come up with out of the operating funds is much less, $909,000 versus the $1.9 million we're looking in the other option. Still, though, this is almost $1 million you have to set aside within your operating budget. And if you look at everything you spend money on, do you have those extra resources? That's really the critical question here. So if we look at these advantages and disadvantages, the advantages, you don't have the referendum required. You have TIF payments that'll offset some of the expense. The disadvantage is similar to option 1. You have to budget up to $910,000 per year in the operating funds, and you cannot predict the timing of the receipt of the TIF revenues. And the last disadvantage, which is something to consider, the debt service extension base is really used up for 20 years, so that precludes a lot of future issuances for a while until those bonds are paid down. Now we go to referendum options, and the next referendum is spring, March 18th, 2014, and we haven't talked a lot about referendum, but just my view on referendums is to educate the community properly and to get your message out there. I think it takes a year, at least a year, to do that. That's just my thought. November 4th is the next referendum after that. February, it's probably not available to you, but we'll double check, see if there's any village elections or any primaries that might take place that would allow you to get on the ballot. Otherwise, it's April 2015, March 2016, November 2016, so on and so forth. All right, so the sample ballot question, I thought I'd just put this out here so you get a feel for it, is, shall the Board of Education of Westmont Community Unit School District improve sites of alter, repair, equip school buildings and issue bonds up to $24 million? Now, you have flexibility with regard to this language to describe exactly what you intend to do with the bond proceeds. So that's a good thing. Generally, you want to be a little more general in case you get into part of the project and it changes a little from what you describe in the referendum question. So you want to use more general language, but try to describe as best you can what the plan is. So the two options we're looking at are 20-year level debt service or 15-year referendum approved bonds. And so here's option 3, the $24 million referendum approved bonds for 20 years. Given the types of projects you're looking at, I think 20 years makes a lot of sense given the average life of building projects. I mean, if you're doing technology, no, I'd say short, but you're looking at major physical plant improvements. So I think amortizing over the maximum 20 years is a very normal thing to do. So the payments over 20 years are $1,948,000. And the impact on the tax rate is about 43 cents on average, and the impact on a $250,000 home is about $362. So you can kind of multiply up or down depending on what size market value home you would have. Here's the 15-year schedule, and paying off the debt shorter means less interest cost, but higher annual payments. So that's about $2,294,000 a year, and that is a 51-cent tax rate increase, or about $425 on that $250,000 market value home. So here's just a comparison. Obviously, paying it off quicker, you have the lower interest rate, but you have the higher dollar amount. The 20-year schedule is more typical at $362 for the 20 years. And when you actually get into the project, if you decide to go this route, as you look at your construction schedule, you might not issue all the bonds at once. You might say, gee, this summer we have $15 million, next summer we have another $10 million. You might split it up, split the issuance up. That would help get you more than just the 20 years. You could do one issue for 20 years and then add on another year. So you can do things to help lower the cost and stagger those payments a little bit. Now this next chart, if you went for the $24 million, 20 years, how could you use that $15 million TIF revenue that's coming in from the village to help offset the payments? Now there's a number of things you could do. One thing you could do is just annual abatements. So let's say you get $1 million one year, you reduce the taxes for that year on the debt service by $1 million through an abatement resolution with a county clerk, very simple. So that's one approach. The approach we've taken in this option is to call in bonds, because when you abate bonds, it's just a rebate. It's just, okay, you're giving the taxpayers a break, but you're not getting rid of any of your interest cost. This option to accumulate the revenues from the TIF and then call in bonds, because these are callable bonds at the call date, reduces not only the principal, but the interest to those bonds too. So in this case, you can see $15 million, we do it in two pieces. We accumulate it through 2023, the first call date, and then we accumulate another, the rest of the $15 million through 2029 to call the rest of the bonds. But if you look at that $15 million versus the debt service you're reducing, it's $17,233,000. So that additional 2 million is interest costs that you're able to reduce from your debt. So in this option, what we're doing is we're shortening the debt, we're paying it off early, and we're reducing the taxes for those people in years, 24 through 33. So that's another issue, an equity issue. Who do you want to give the break to? Maybe you'll have other building plans that need to be addressed out in those years, so maybe this would work well. But those are just this is just an example to show you an economical way to use those TIF revenues for reducing debt service. Okay, so the advantages of a bond referendum is it is a separate referendum approved debt service tax levy extended to pay the debt service. So there's no impact whatsoever on your current operating funds. There is also no additional limit on the debt service extension base. So when you get done paying off those bonds in 2019 or so, you'll have that debt base to do additional life safety or whatever projects you might need to do at that time. And also, you have the ability to use the TIF revenues to reduce debt service when the funds are received in the future. The disadvantage to this option is simply the education, time, and effort required to pass a referendum. This is another referendum option I wanted to talk about. It's a debt service extension-based option. So instead of asking the voters for approval for one bond issue for $24 million, what you could do alternatively is ask for an increase in the debt service extension base. So as we mentioned, your debt service extension base right now is about $1,254,000. So if we, I put an example together what it would look like if we asked the voters to increase that debt service extension base to $3 million, up from $1.2 million, and then use that debt base to pay off $24 million of bonds. So the question on the ballot looks like this, and it's kind of long and confusing, so it would take some explanation, but the concept is pretty simple. It says, shall the debt service extension base under the property tax extension limitation law for the district for payment of principal and interest on limited bonds be increased from $1,254,000 to $3 million. And this, if you did this this spring, it would be for the 2014 levy year and all those levy years thereafter. So, and the debt base would then also, like it does now, increase by CPI. Okay, that's part of the law. So that would be part of the question. So here's how you could structure this. Going from the left again, EAV, our debt service extension base, you notice right below the line in 2014, your debt base is going from that $1,254,000 up to $3 million. Then it grows by CPI in the subsequent years. Okay, so from that $3 million, we now have to subtract your outstanding non-referendum debt service, just like before, that goes out to 2019, the life safety bonds, and then we'd add in the proposed $24 million. The way we've structured this $24 million is so it blends in with your existing debt. So we're paying interest only in the first 5 years or so, and then level debt service after that of about $2,183,000. So if you look at the total debt service column, you've got your increase that goes from $1.2 million to $1.9 million to $2.4 million, and then it drops back down to $2.1 million. Okay, so this is a little softer graduated impact on the taxpayer because we're paying interest only to wrap it around our existing non-referendum limited tax bonds outstanding. Now, the debt capacity column is very interesting in this case. We're asking to go up to $3 million, but our debt service is really about $2,000,001 for 20 years on $24 million. What that means is the district has additional debt service capacity for projects in the future. Unlike your aggregate extension, if you don't use your debt service extension base, it does not go away. So this referendum is permanent in nature. This debt service extension base would permanently be brought up to the $3 million level. It would not go away, but if you decide we don't need to use it, we just did 24 million and we got all our projects up to date, we don't need to use it for a few years. You don't have to, and you don't lose it. Okay, so that's one of the beautiful things about this type of referendum. It not only helps you accomplish your immediate project needs, but it also leaves you flexibility for other things, like life safety and working cash as needed in the future. So if you look at the tax rate here, I highlighted in yellow the tax rate, because unlike the other options where it's just a new dollar amount, this kind of blends with your existing debt. So your tax rate goes up to 57 cents and then it comes down to 49 cents. If we isolate the impact of just the 24 million debt service, you can see how it kind of increases from 131 to 221 to 214 to 405. But a taxpayer's not going to feel that increase up to 405. Why? Because they're paying the old bonds and the new bonds at the same time. They're actually going to feel a decrease after the old bonds are paid off. And that's shown in that yellow column where it goes, up to the 57 cents, but then down 55, 51, and 49. So it's a little graduated impact, if you will. Here, you could do the same thing with the 15 million that you get from the TIF by paying off bonds early, defeasing bonds in this case. We've shown accumulating that 15 million and then calling in bonds, saving interest, paying off the principal, paying off the debt before shortening the debt so you have more room, actually your full debt service extension base available to you later for additional projects as needed. So I think this works very well. Advantage, separate referendum, approved debt service tax levy. Again, no impact on the operating funds. Additional DSEB available for other capital projects in the future. Ability to use the TIF revenues to reduce debt service. Disadvantage, any referendum, time and effort and education to pass a referendum. So I feel like I've gone fast, but maybe I haven't. Maybe I'm taking forever. So if you have any questions at this point.
We have one to start with, I guess. There's been a lot of clarification with TIF and, we can only use that money to pay for improvements within the TIF zone. But if we're issuing general bonds, that money from those bonds would be used across the district. How do we reconcile that the TIF money can only be used for, X,
Right.
but these bonds are used for A to Z?
Well, if you're going to spend 15 million on Manning and it's within the 24 million, you can use the 15 million. If you only spend 10 million of the 24 million on Manning, then you can only use 10 million of the TIF to reduce bonds. But that additional 5 million that you get can be used for other things you need at Manning later on.
I think you just answered a question. Were you finished? I think you just answered the question I had. Looking at the sample ballot question on page 16. And
16 or 19? Oops, maybe it's 19. Okay, for the debt service extension base?
That one.
Yeah, sorry.
That's capital only. This is capital projects only. So we are asking to have our debt service raised to 3 million.
Right.
But am I correct that it's only for capital projects?
The debt service extension base can be used to issue working cash bonds, life safety bonds, or funding bonds. So this 24 million would have to be one or a combination of those three types of bonds that all can be used for capital projects. So that's not a problem for the 24 million. But I think your question is, if push came to shove, could we issue bonds from this debt base at a future time away from the 24 million to be used for operations? You could. It would have to be a taxable issue, and you'd have to follow the IRS rules for, working capital bonds for operations. as opposed to capital.
And again, just, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. So the question is, if the district decided to go for a referendum, we haven't done one in a long time. So, and I know that there's legality about when you ask, you better make sure you know what you're asking for, and make sure that the community knows
Yes.
what you're asking for. So that was why I was saying, if we did go for referendum to pay off this
Through the
24
debt base.
million, then as time goes on, if there was more bonding capacity, would that be able to be something that the district could use for operating funds?
Yes. Through the issuance of taxable working cash bonds.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned the sample ballot question could be, pretty much we have a lot of leeway in how we.
Right, on the referendum bond question you do, on the debt service extension bond question, this is it.
Okay.
I mean, you can choose another number other than 3 million, I just use that as an example, but you can't describe the project in the debt service extension-based question. You'd have to do that through your information campaign.
Okay. Because I was just thinking, because it says, the question says 24 million, but, I mean, we're expecting 15 million to be covered through the TIF. I don't know how you
Yeah, but the
That would
thing
be the
is,
get that.
education.
That would just, it could only be in the education part of the referendum. It couldn't be,
You wouldn't want to embed that in the question, no, because the TIF dollars are not a guarantee. And so you wouldn't be able to ask that within the question that went on. the ballot.
how would you guarantee that you're going to use, well, you have to use the money for Manning, but how are you going to guarantee that you're going to use the money to pay back the bonds? Is that in the,
Educating your community and then, it's like anything else in terms of when we have our budget, we pass our budget, when we have our audit, our monthly bills that are approved, within that, you could demonstrate to the community that you are, holding to your word and making, and these dollars are going to the Manning project, and then we're paying off those bonds with the TIF dollars. You'd be able to, through the, various resolutions that would be passed by the board.
But Joel, was that like a future question? I felt like you were asking a little bit of a different question there than the answer. So are we
Well,
really
I-
wanting to know, like,
there's a couple
10
of.
years from now?
Yeah, there's a couple of options. One of them is the mixed alternate bonds and using our current.
ESUB, yeah.
So the alternate bonds, funding source for those we would really have to say is our some sort of
O&M.
Operating funds.
O&M fund or something like that.
Yeah.
And not the TIF. And so.
Right.
The TIF is just, the numbers from the TIF here are just an example of what it would look like, but it's really not an official, in the official paperwork of either issuing the bonds or referendum or anything. We're just saying, when we get this money, the TIF agreement requires that we use it towards Manning School, and this is how we would intend to do it.
That's what I thought.
It's
you were
not really.
Right, because you
It's
can't
more about the TIF agreement than it is about any new referendum or issuing new bonds.
So Kevin, it's kind of a, 10 or 15 years from now, how do we know the TIF revenue that's coming in is really going to go to repay these bonds? Is there anything that says that somewhere, or we're just on our honor,
Yeah, I think you're on your,
right?
right.
I mean, that's, because
Right.
this goes on over a long period of time, and, maybe you'll still be here 23 years from now, but not sure the rest of us can make it that long. So, I think it's a valid sort of question of, we know we want this to happen, but 10 or 15 years from now, do we have anything that says TIF revenue that comes in would need to go towards this particular debt obligation, regardless of how we come up with the money. It doesn't even matter. It's completely separate from the notion of where we get the money from. It has to do with how we repay wherever we get that money from.
I guess in an option that includes, well, we're gonna reduce the levy based on the TIF revenues we're getting back, how do we guarantee that to our community? I mean, we can say that, but where do they get that guarantee?
You can pass a resolution.
Right.
Okay.
And then I believe now, because part of it's the village and their involvement, but, you know, the TIF dollars can only be used for capital development projects within the TIF district. So I would imagine we would have to demonstrate to the village that we have capital development projects within the TIF district that we are going to be using those funds for. You know, I don't think they just necessarily say, oh, here's the.
Right.
Here's the
Well, we
money.
had to demonstrate that even to come to the agreement to begin with, so.
Right.
Yeah, I mean.
So that is kind of
So-
guaranteeing in the future that money would be used to pare down that debt.
No,
Or you
it's
could use it for
guaranteeing that
other
it'll be spent within the TIF district.
Right.
It's not
Right.
guaranteeing that.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
Right.
which that was kind of the point I got from Joel's question, that why I kept digging a little, because I think that is a concern. I mean, if we do this and obligate ourselves in any way, you know, I think we want to know that our intent carries forward over time. And that, you know, that to the best advantage of the district and our taxpayers, we're using that TIF money to try and lessen everybody's burden.
Can I ask a question? You had said something, again, correct me if I'm wrong. You had said something in these charts about like the impact on the $250,000 market value home. And you said something like that's not how much it's going to go up.
Well, on this option 4, it's a little different than the straight referendum bond question, where you have a, you know, level debt service every year. And the reason is because these bonds on option 4, page 20, are being paid from the debt service extension base. And you've already got some debt outstanding on that debt service extension base that extends through 2018, 2019. So the way we've structured this is so that, you know, we're paying off interest only while the other bonds are outstanding. So if you look at the total debt service column, you can see, you know, that the interest on the new bonds, which is $1,153,000, plus the payment of principal and interest on the life safety bonds of $1,286,000 equals about $2.4 million. Okay, so we're going up in total debt to $2.4 million. But then when the old bonds are paid off, the debt drops to $2.1 million. So from how that's going to feel to a taxpayer, they're not going to feel an increase after the old bonds are going to be paid off. They're actually going to feel a decrease. So that's different than level debt, where you're paying, you know, $1.9 million every single year on top of your existing debt. Am I making sense?
Yes, but I can see our educational curve will need to be.
Yeah, so I mean, I just draw your attention to the total debt service column, where you can see it goes up more gradually, then goes down and levels off at 2.1 million, and the tax rate, which does the same thing. If we try to isolate this debt service alone to tell a taxpayer what it's going to cost them, it in fact is being phased in and then leveled off. So that's kind of the point I was trying to make there. It's a little different structure than the referendum question, straight for 24 million, level debt service for 20 years.
And just one more question. You give us some of these successful.
Yes. Just I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this DSEB referendum, because it is not it's not that typical. Most referendum bonds are just for a bond issue. But the districts that I've worked with, and I know Kevin has been in one of those districts too, where they've passed the debt service extension base, I mean, the real advantage of it is that you not only accomplish the projects that you're contemplating right now, which you have to, of course, talk about in your referendum campaign, but you are allowing future flexibility. And if the voters agree that that's a good idea, I think that's going to set you up with more financial stability in the long run, more flexibility to do the capital projects you need, even if you need operating. You know, not that we ever recommend doing bonds for operating, but the question was asked, could we? And the answer is yes. Mundelein High School, really in the teeth of the referendum in April of 2011, increased their debt base from $770,000 to $3 million, and issued bonds to fund a faulty aquatic center. They did turf fields and a number of improvements to windows and energy savings types projects that were well overdue. So one of the beauties to this is that their old referendum bonds were paid off just as these new debt service from the debt base increased, so it wasn't too much of an increase for them because some old bonds were getting retired. But the thing that sold this referendum for Mundelein was the projects. Whether you go for referendum just for 24 million or the DSEB, what is going to make voters say yes is they understand the need and they agree that they want these projects done for the school. It's all about the projects. And in Arlington Heights School District 25, they had no debt service extension base. Again, there it was about the projects, but it was also about budgetary cuts, because they had outstanding bonds, kind of like at this option 1, that were alternate bonds that were some very large payments in their operating funds, because that was their only way to get projects done, through alternate bonds. So that was really cramping their programmatic curriculum stuff, and so they were having to make cuts. Passing this DSEB of $5.5 million allowed them to, number one, refund those alternate bond payments that they had to make room for their budget for onto the debt base, and allowed them to take care of all of their accumulated capital projects at their schools that were well overdue. So, you know, again, these referendums kind of sound complicated and funny on the ballot, but it's all about the projects. And then in Elk Grove Village 59, they approved a brand-new debt base of $5 million, and that allowed them to refund some operating debt and issued subsequent bonds for capital improvements. But they were also looking at having to do some pretty severe operational cuts unless they got this referendum passed. So these 3 stories have been fabulous long-term for these districts. Obviously, the 59 referendum was in 03, Arlington Heights was in 05, and then Mundelein was just recently. But I think the good news for these districts is that their bonds have been paid off very quickly. They're able to reaccess their debt base and have room for additional projects should they need it, and took the pressure off their operating funds. So.
That's why I asked that question about, like, I really looked at the stuff that you've given us, and that's why I had that question about capital projects or
Operating.
the flexibility.
You have that flexibility.
Yeah. Because if you're going to ask it, you might as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, I know Kevin has done a wonderful job so far of talking. And we've all been talking about what we're talking about, why we're doing this. We're not just going out to get some more cash in the
Right.
bank. But we are following facility needs and concerns and stuff.
Right.
So thank you for that.
I have a couple just sort of basic numbers questions. First one is, I think that you mentioned the 3 million, if we were to go for the DSEB increase, I think you mentioned that the 3 million was kind of sort of an arbitrary number that you picked, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the chart is based on that 3 million, but ultimately, I mean, given what our debt capacity would be going across the years, do we necessarily believe we would have to be going for that much? Do you think that's just a best practice number, or just sort of a random?
Well, this was my logic, you know, and it's just, again, you can choose any number you want, whether it's 3 million, 2.5. I put 2.5 million in here, just see what it looked like, and it's still it still works, but it just doesn't give you very much additional bonding authority should you need it. So that's why I went to 3 million, because I figure if you're going to do it and you want to take care of this 24 million initially, but you want to give yourself some flexibility for other things. Because the 24 million, I think you should amortize it over 20 years, because these are long-term projects. But if you get your debt base too small and you use it all up with this 24 million, you're really locking yourself out, kind of like option 1 for 20 years. So that was my logic in picking 3 million.
Okay. My next other sort of numbers question, you mentioned you've just used 1.5 CPI over the
Yeah,
forever into the future. I mean,
very conservative.
yeah, I mean, I realize that that's a crystal ball kind of a number, but how dramatically do these things change if CPI suddenly starts averaging 3%? I mean, what,
Yeah, I mean, it would.
without having this Excel spreadsheet where I can put numbers in and start playing with it, you know, I think I'm too tired to do that math in my head. So maybe I'm gonna ask you to do it in your head instead, which you know,
is
what's
not a
the
very good
end
thing
result
without
in the
my
right-hand
Excel, yeah.
columns, you
Get
know? if
liberty
you-
to do it.
Right, somebody can do it in their head, I'm sure.
I mean, the 3% obviously would make the numbers in that green column be larger.
Right. Our debt capacity
Our
would be
debt
quite a bit
capacity
larger.
would be
if
larger.
CPI
It wouldn't change anything about how you would pay off the 24 million. I mean, that's set.
Right, right.
So whatever is left over in that capacity box is great. You can use it or not. I think the good point here is, let's say we have 5% CPIs for the next 10 years, is very unlikely, and this goes up to, you know, $1 million, $2 million, and $5 million at the end. Well, you don't have to use all that money. You don't have to bond it all out.
We shouldn't.
And you should, you know, I know you guys and future boards are all tax rate sensitive. You want to keep things level, and that's the whole idea of the debt service extension base in the first place, to keep debt at or about the amount that either the voters have approved or that you've levied for in the past. So.
And also, like, looking at this particular, the DSEB over 20 years, so the EAV is the same number every single year from now to eternity?
Yeah.
So is it the same outcome if EAV increases, then our green column increases?
No.
No.
If the EAV increases, then the tax rate for debt
Decreases. See, so it does something on the right. I
It
just
does
have to figure out
something.
what it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't increase your capacity,
So-
it just makes the tax rate lower,
Right.
bigger base to spread the burden over.
So it has to do with the yellow column and then the ultimate impact on the market value, taxes for that.
Right.
So EAV increasing is really a huge benefit to our tax base.
Especially if it's increasing because of new property.
And increasing outside the TIF district,
Yes. Yeah,
not increasing within the TIF district, which doesn't help us at all.
doesn't help you at all, exactly.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm reading all
got
the
it.
numbers correctly.
Any other questions? Okay, so what's next?
Well, my guess is the board's gonna wanna digest this a little bit. And so then we, you know, ultimately, the board is gonna have to reach consensus on which of these options you would like to pursue. And then, depending upon the option, then we start to reach out to our community and educating them and discussing with them the option that we'd like to see and start going down that road.
Can I just ask a general question? So over the last 2 conferences, as well as a lot of regional dinners, there's a lot of talk about areas that have been successful with referendum have, you know, publicity campaigns and have, you know, spent a measurable amount of money on those campaigns, whether they're hiring people or just in the sheer distribution of the information. I mean, is that, if the board were interested in going the route of referendum, is that we would then have to consider that option, or are we, you know, trying to do this on a shoestring, or what do we think our approach would be? I mean, if we're trying to decide what we're interested in, well,
Right.
we kind of need to know, we need to talk about how we would approach it too, because if we're not gonna
Well, first of all, the, no district dollars can be used.
Right.
So, typically, once kind of the board knows, the direction they want to go and the question they want to ask, typically you try to find that core group of citizens who, will run with that campaign, and they do some fundraising, you know, seek donations, fundraising to develop those materials, and you know, and it's done a couple different ways. One is you see how much money you can get and then develop your budget, or you kind of have a goal of a budget you want for your campaign and then go about the process of raising money for that.
And we can't, right? I mean, there's some fairly strict legal guidelines about
Right.
the board's involvement in that process.
We can inform, we can't ask.
Right, you can't,
Can't ask.
employees of the district or the board can tell people how to vote. You know, you can provide information.
I remember going to one of those.
Yeah, it's
ISB
very
things. We talked about
specific.
that. It's
Very
similar to what the village just did here with their information, you know,
Right, for the home rule.
for the home rule, right?
When was our last
Yeah,
referendum?
which, look how well that worked out.
I think in
It's
the
like
80s.
27 or 28 years, I don't know.
think
It's
for some reason
85.
86,
I think 85 or 86.
25 years,
yeah.
so.
86.
somewhere around there, yeah.
So will you be available 24/7 like the Butterbell turkey line?
I'm here to help you.
Well,
All
you
the
know, I
information you
just
need.
have to say thank you very much for giving us this information. It is a lot to
A lot to think about.
And I,
think about.
you know, in terms of the referendum question, I've got information, and I'm trying to envision in my mind where it's at exactly in my office. But there are kind of frameworks for referendum campaigns if you have a year, if you have 3 months. I mean, kind of what those, you know, steps are and what it looks like that I can provide to the board.
I think those would be good things to know,
Mhm.
you know, as we work towards what our interests are, what direction we're interested in going in. I think we need to know what it
Right.
takes.
So what you're saying is our next step is that we have to discuss this.
Right, right. Have a
in the near
discussion about
future.
if some of these
And then-
options we know we can take off the table.
I think I can take 1 and 2 off the table. I think, does anyone else really?
I think I.
For right
agree.
now,
I
anyhow.
completely agree with that.
I do too.
I think our budget
Right.
would prohibit us.
I don't think
Yeah,
you can
I-
do.
Yeah, I'm not even
We have
sure it's an option. I
$109
don't
million
even know.
in
I'm not
our-
even sure we could
So we're
consider
strictly
it.
looking at a referendum option, and then so the question would be,
Which option?
which,
Whether-
which
And the
of the
time
debt
frame
service?
too, the
Right,
level of
time
effort
frame.
based on the time frame. You know, 6 months, you know, a year, however.
Right.
I mean, that's an important part of it too, I think.
So let's say we're gonna, did we just make a decision here?
Well,
We're gonna
I
take off-
think-
I mean, we can
yeah.
talk more, but.
Right.
So we would need to start having our own, I mean, when do you do public hearing? I mean, do you do all that, a public hearing, or do you wait till you get to, I mean, do you have a
the-
public hearing, or how does
You
that?
you don't, typically you don't have a public hearing. At some point in time, the board would have to pass a resolution, you know, to go on the ballot. And you kind of, you know, you look at which election you're kind of gearing up for, and then there's typically a date that a board has to pass a resolution in order to get it on to the ballot and to DuPage County. And then, you know, there's also, again, the whole referendum campaign, but you don't really, I mean, you can have, you know, meetings in which, forums in which you kind of throw out ideas to whoever's there, community members, and find out what they would consider. You can do surveys and kind of get an idea of what people are where they're at. You know, so you can gather that kind of information. But typically, the formal board action is the resolution.
So unlike the bonds where there's the petition and the public hearing and all that,
Mhm.
this is handled differently, so it starts basically with the resolution.
Right.
Up to that point, okay.
So do we know, so for example, for 2014, for the spring, I would imagine it would be before the end of the year or January at the very latest that we would have to do some sort of resolution.
December.
I think it's December.
December?
Yeah. 90
to get
days.
it on that ballot
65
in
days.
the spring.
If you're
If-
saying for spring of 14, right?
Mhm.
But the information you have in front of us is for spring of 15. That's your.
Well, that's when we issue the
timing,
bonds.
just timing,
Yeah.
yes.
Your first chance for referendum is March 2014, which means that resolution would have to be passed sometime in December.
And wouldn't I mean, at some point, we have to identify, or you have to identify a committee, right?
Right, I mean, right, typically you, seek out individuals who will form that committee.
And then would they help determine what the timeline should look like? Or do we make that determination?
I think it can be done either way. I mean, one of the things, the key piece is the education piece. And so the question becomes, for instance, if you're looking at spring of 2014, if we think between, basically now and then, would we have the ample opportunity to educate our community, to the point where we think we could be successful. And so part of that does depend on, number one, how informed the community is already, how much they've been paying attention to the issues and that type of thing. Or will this, the last thing you want to have happen, obviously, is on election day, people walk into the voting booth and they're looking at this question, are like, shocked, where did this come from? I had no idea that this was on the ballot. So you're trying to avoid that, and so the question becomes, do you have enough time between now and the spring of 2014 to adequately educate your community?
So we would need to have some kind of, we could host forums as to where we are at. And then from there, because obviously the people that would be on this committee have to be pro-referendum.
Typically, yes.
I mean, they,
Typically, they are in favor of the
So you need to get, so you
resolution.
need to get X number of people educated.
Right.
And I guess, just because of watching what just happened with the village, I think I remember hearing at one of their meetings that the wording on the ballot had to be a certain way because of
Right.
what they were trying to do. But you're telling us we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of, not that that's a mouthful anyway, but we have a little bit of flexibility as to what we can put on a ballot?
Depends
Not
on
for-
which question.
Right,
Yes,
not for
yes,
the
yes.
DSEB. For the
Right.
DSEB, we have no flexibility.
Right, the flexibility you have with the DSEB is the amount that you're increasing it to,
Right, but not the wording.
but not
Not
the
the
wording.
wording, okay.
Well, after hearing everything that Elizabeth shared, I mean, I would probably be, and knowing what I know about our community, and they would probably want things to be fairly specific. I mean, I would have to say the last option, just kind of giving, is going to be a little more ambiguous, to explain to the community. I think if you have something very specific, a shorter timeline for education and, getting the word out, it might allow us to move forward with this in the spring. If we're going to go for the DSEP option, I think that's probably going to take more education and discussion with the community, and there's going to be probably some hesitancy because it's more open-ended.
Well, I guess that's why I was asking that follow-up question to what you were saying about what the tax bill looks like. Because that's going to be the first question everybody asks. How does it affect me?
Right. I mean, I understand what you're saying about this, and it's true, the debt service extension-based question is more open-ended because it gives you opportunity to do other things down the road, but both questions take trust, okay? If you go for 24 million, the ballot question does not tell you how you're going to pay those bonds off. You tell the community how you're going to do it. 20-year level debt service, if that's what you're going to do, that's what you tell them. You don't have to do it that way. You could pay them off in 10 years if you wanted to. Similar with a debt service extension base, you're authorizing an amount of debt service, maximum amount that you can pay off a year. You could pay it off shorter than we've shown in these options and make the tax impact higher within the limit of the $3 million, or you could do the 20-year schedule. So my point is there's an element of trust between the board and the community that is there, has to be there in either option. You have to do what you say you're going to do. So simple as that.
So just, following up with what Joel's saying, I mean, I suppose we should ask, is it possible to try to do something? I mean, we have to obviously come to terms with what we're going to be looking for, but is it possible, probable?
It'd be a very tight timeline to, if our goal was a spring 2014 election, it'd be a tight timeline, for sure.
Because we are looking at a resolution in December, which is 2 months away, right?
Right. And the resolution itself, it's very easy to draft a resolution and have it on the agenda. It's the education of your community before the spring of 2014.
And didn't I hear you say that it takes about a year to
That's
properly
my
educate your
experience.
experience?
That's my experience.
So that would push us more towards November.
Either
Or
day.
February 15th.
Is, but we have partially begun those conversations with some of the work we've already done with the facilities committee, and a lot of people, at least in the school community, are somewhat aware of what we've done, what our needs are in the future based on some of that work. So it's not like we're starting just from scratch. We do have a little bit of groundwork or legwork done, but.
Joel, I have to agree with you. The only thing I would be concerned about is reaching out to people other than our families. Just because, we've been getting that message out to our families.
But your families are the ones who are going to reach out further
Yes.
into the community. So we're not starting at square one with our families.
Right, yes.
I think there is a certain understanding of what we've done and where we were intended on going.
I think that a lot of the examples we've seen through the ISB functions, whether it's Tri-I or the regional, local things, those districts that have been successful have put in a year and a half of
They've
pay.
also many of them have also failed on their
I'm
first
talking
time
about the
around,
ones-
and then,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
an ongoing process of educating. Well, what didn't we convey to make this
Absolutely.
successful? And sometimes you won't know that until after the vote is cast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I remember hearing that at one of our conferences. I mean, is there, I don't want to say is there a value to that, but is there any way you run it up the flagpole and then you ask the flagpole is,
Again, there's different school of thoughts. One is that, the first time you ask a question, it's not successful. And so you kind of approach it from that frame of reference. And so you do try to get it on. And so you kind of gauge where everybody's at. But then the other, side will argue that, again, if you're doing your due diligence and, there's a true need and you're communicating that and you're educating your community, then you improve your opportunity to be successful. And so then, because each time you go after it, there is an investment of time and, not district money, but there is money that has to be raised and generated. So it's a process.
okay, anything else? All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, superintendent's report.
Okay, first with regards to the EBR process, those programs that we prioritized, you have the identified facilitators for each of those programs. And then in October, we're starting out the program review, and then we'll begin identifying community members to assist with that study. In November, the information will be shared with parent groups, and then we have our joint committee meeting, so obviously information will be shared there, and then we're continuing that process. Initial reports in December will be shared with the administrative team and then also the finance committee. And then in January, those reports will be finalized and brought to the board.
So do the people that you've identified as facilitators have the capacity currently to do these things?
Yes.
Okay, because at least one of these people is not a full-time employee, and I'm sure is already very busy.
I had that same question.
Right.
I just want, I mean, what has slowed us down up to this point is just, sheer
Right.
capacity and things we're trying to accomplish. And, I mean, some of the people on here probably have a little more capacity than others, and we just want to make sure that we're not,
Sure.
Because that piece of the pie is a pretty big one, I would imagine.
Right. And, at the same time, you have a facilitator, but there's other people who are involved in that process.
Okay.
And so,
I think it bears asking at least.
Sure. Then with the regards to the website, we had training last Friday there will be 2 individuals in each building that will predominantly be responsible for updating and maintaining the website for each of the buildings. And then even, is it Thursday, Kim, that we're training individuals for the calendar piece? Tomorrow. So, there's additional training ongoing. And then at our October 30th SIP Day, we'll be bringing teachers up to speed on their role and how the changes, the differences between the current website and what they can expect with the new. Nancy Battaglia will be at the October 22nd board meeting to kind of share out with the board what the website looks like to date and some of the features with it so that the board can kind of have an idea of what it looks like. But we are still on target for that mid-November launch.
Is the teacher's role in the website primarily around the blogs and communication, or what, when teachers are receiving training, what?
Right, it's around them being able to develop pages for themselves,
Okay.
how to communicate to parents, right, and how to get information out to parents.
Okay,
So yes.
thank you.
Was there community input for the website, or, did they hold a meeting with community members, or did that ever happen, or no?
That hasn't happened yet. That's now that the buildings have received their training, the next step for the buildings then will be to seek, to get some input from parents as to what they would like to see and allowing parents a little access to it to get a feel for the website and get feedback from them.
I will say that I volunteered to.
How do you volunteer to do that? Because I would like to volunteer to do that, too.
I think the board just volunteers in general, right?
Okay, you're on. No, I wrote to Nancy.
Aren't we all going to be on that?
Yeah,
If you want, there's, obviously the website isn't live, but I can have Nancy send you a link that will allow you to then have access to the website to view it.
I'd be perfectly happy viewing it when the parents view it, and, I guess I would just like to see it before it's
Sure.
done.
Oh, yeah. And the board will, the 22nd, the board's going to see it, but then definitely will.
So far, I will report that it seems intuitive. I've seen it in 2 phases from when it first started, and it seems better than our current one. And I'm not trying to.
Not sure that that's really
I'm not.
difficult to do, but.
I've said enough already tonight, but it looks more intuitive. But again, when you start playing around with doing pull downs, there's not a lot there yet because of what's there.
So I know that within the school community, there are some parents that have some fairly extensive web design experience. Are the buildings or whoever's doing this able to reach out to some of those people? I mean, those folks have a lot of best practice information. They have a lot of years of user interface, studies and experience and that type of thing. It, certainly seems to me, as much as any of us could look at it, I mean, someone who's been involved in user interface development for the last 10 or 15 years is going to have a lot more insight, sort of at the global level.
Sure.
And there are some web designers that are parents within our district.
Sure. And we can, if of individuals, you can, send them my way, and we can definitely reach out to make sure that we're.
Take advantage of who we have out there.
Sure. And then with regards to Skyward, grades, again, grades 5 through 12 now, parents have the opportunity to.
5?
Right, have the opportunity to view their students' progress. And so the protocol is going to be Wednesday, that grades should be updated by Wednesday. And so that once a week, then those grades should be refreshed and parents should see that. And the other thing I know that was brought to our attention is that in that process of dropping classes, the drop classes still appear in the parent view, and it doesn't make it very user-friendly. And so we did correct that, and hopefully as parents are pulling up that screen now, they're not seeing the drop classes, you're just seeing the active classes for the student.
And I know that I was hearing from people, especially like the junior high, because of all the beginning of the year changes with that. So I know I've found it to be much less confusing.
Good.
So, yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Quick question on Wednesday. I know a couple years ago, they used to say it had to be done on Thursday, and this is going back probably 4 or 5 years. Thursdays because of it had to determine sports eligibility on Friday morning. Is there a shift to Wednesday from Thursday for any LCs, or?
I think it's the opportunity to look at those eligibility reports on Thursday rather than Friday morning.
Sure.
So that's why, just to, for one thing, obviously if a student's not doing what they need to do to be successful in the classroom, that's one thing. Sometimes it's human error, though. And so this gives the opportunity then, if there truly is indeed human error, it can be fixed. So that's why it's Wednesday. And then in terms of communication, we did, again, identify that starting on October 17th, the Cass Avenue Railroad crossing will be closed for repairs.
You're going to have to say this like every day. For
I know.
I was just going to say that,
Nice.
send it out
Yeah.
another 12 times between now and the 17th.
I mean, it was
Will.
great what came out already, I just
Right.
have to say, but boy.
Yeah.
Right, we did send it out on blogs, we did the parent link, and included are the list of the stops and what the adjustment will be made, what the times. The west of the crossing is the pedestrian crossing, and that will still be available to students, and the Westmont Police Department will be available to assist students with that. But as, we're working through this, if we find out that the adjusted times aren't working, we'll retool those, we'll get that information out to parents as quickly as possible. So hopefully everybody's getting the communication, and it'll go smoothly on the 17th.
I did have a question about that, because I did look at that. And it seemed, I don't know, and I certainly don't, again, profess to know, but it seemed like it wasn't a big change in the amount of time.
And we've asked them, they did do a dry run,
Okay.
of the routes now, obviously, and then added some additional time based on anticipated traffic. So with those starting on Thursday, we have Thursday and Friday to kind of see how things go. That gives us the weekend to tweak it, and really we need people to be patient during the process, because we don't really know what that impact is going to look like. So I mean, people just really have to realize that there's some things that are beyond our control. We're trying to plan as best as we can ahead of time, but they're going to have some flexibility, and hopefully this gives people enough time to make alternate arrangements, for, children arriving late home from school, or, buses being late, that they have some backup, in terms of somebody that can make sure their kids get on the bus and things.
And we've also talked to other people that bus to our buildings, like the Park District or child care places, because the Park District has to cross from both of our elementary schools. So, I mean, are we coordinated with all the buses, not just Westway?
Actually, right now, we've been coordinating with our own buses. Yeah.
So
For all of our students, I have not contacted the Park District.
I mean, we have
Sure.
a bus full of kids between the two elementary schools that go to the Park District after school, I think. So probably want to check
Well,
that.
and hopefully the village reached out to them, but we'll.
Sure.
It seems inevitable, though, that the Park District always seems to have a heads up. Even before we do, Steve, I'm sure, knows that this is happening, and Sylvia's got it.
We've been in contact, obviously, provide transportation for Holy Trinity.
Sure.
Pam Simon and I have been in contact on that. All of our special ed transportation everyone's been contacted for that. So it's, really, and obviously the communication's going out to parents, so if they have daycare, we're, anticipating that they're making sure that daycare knows what those arrangements are, because we don't provide for that transportation.
Right. I think there still would be an expectation, though, on a family's side, that we would have had a conversation. So I agree, we're not responsible, but I think there's an expectation of, you're handing my kid off to that provider that you're not responsible for, that at least we can say we discussed it. I'm also curious, Kevin, about families that don't currently get emails. So will something, I think there are still a percentage of our families that are not really electronically well connected to the district.
The information will be given to students to bring home as well, the route information.
Okay.
So that's part of it as well. So hopefully, parents will check student backpacks and we'll get the information that way if they haven't gotten it electronically.
Okay.
Sure.
So I guess the only question that I had was that just when I looked at the schedule, because, Kim, I agree with you 100%. People have to be flexible. It just didn't look like there was enough time added on, and I don't know, because it just seems like all of a sudden you're going to have people that, woke up one morning and, look here, trains. So it just didn't seem like there was enough time to do that. So I don't know, that's just a comment, so I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that, maybe people will take vacations then or something.
Well, and, they did do the dry run, so hopefully, they did their due diligence. And again, if day one ends up, students getting to school very late, then we'll have to make some additional adjustments.
I think it's going to be bad, and everybody should know it's going to be bad, and we can all be cautiously optimistic, but that's just the reality. This is not anything anybody has any control over, and, I think we've obviously doing what we can to communicate it out. We've talked about it at 2, possibly 3 meetings already, so,
Hope for the best, plan
hope for the
worst.
best, prepare for the
Prepare
worst.
for the worst. I did like the information that went out today. I thought that was great, so. Every day. I'm just kidding.
Right, we can. And then the last thing, we do have a date for the open house at South School. It'll be November 14th, which is a Thursday. Originally I had the 16th, which I was politely told was a Saturday. So November 14th is a Thursday, 6 o'clock to 7:30, and that will be an opportunity for parents and community members to tour the Early Childhood Center and the district office. And Steve Cashman will be available as well. So if anybody's there and really has some questions about some of the changes and renovations.
Okay, thank you. Board reports, are there any board reports?
It was a great homecoming game.
Games.
Games, yes, it was a very fun event.
It was, it was such a great night because, again, talk about collaborative work, to have the high school band, the junior high band, and alums come back and play all on the field together. It was fantastic just to watch that. It was a good feel-good night all the way around.
And I also loved that there were football players who then ran into and played in with the band. I just thought that was fantastic.
And the parade went well? No rain at all? So very good.
And I'll also add I think this was between our two meetings, the Miller Ice Cream Social
Oh, yeah, July.
was a well-attended event, and fortunately, they had nice weather this year. I think last year was kind of drizzly and rainy, which was unfortunate, but there was a lot of people, and it was
Yeah, that was a lot of
a
fun.
nice get-to-know-you event, so I was happy to participate in that.
It was
I'll
nice.
also, add, I know there's a letter in all of our folders from the 8th grade social studies class from a student, and I would just like to say that that letter was very well written, and I had nothing to do with it, and I think it was a very good example of scholarly writing, which is what the focus is in junior high literacy, so I appreciate that very much, so.
It was a
I just wanted
wonderful
to say
letter
that.
and appreciated.
Yes, very nice. Very good.
I will pass that along, because I'm sure this individual is not watching right now.
Unless there's coffee. Okay, any other, did you want to talk about this?
October 17th, Superintendent's Coffee, 7 o'clock at the high school. And possibly some of the discussion that took place tonight will be topic as well. If we have some community members, they can provide us feedback.
And just in case people don't know, this is open to the whole community.
Right.
Anybody could come to this.
And I also want to mention the November 14th is the open house at South School. It's
Yes.
the kickoff of all the wonderful things we do with the money you provide us for our facilities and our students. And so it's a great opportunity to see the kinds of things that we do with the money you entrust to us.
Of course, the superintendent's coffee is on the same day that they start working on the track, so if you're on the south side of the tracks, leave early.
Yeah.
Or just
Might
stay.
get some feedback on transportation too.
Yeah, right. You sure you want to keep that day?
Yeah.
All right, then, any other board reports? Okay, are there any public comments?
Thank you. I'm Dan Charleston. The bond discussion, just to add a thought, and I very much appreciate Liz Hennessy. She's one of the finest bond underwriters in this market, particularly for school districts and other municipalities. But Liz and her firm in particular only get paid when public entities sell bonds. That's the only time they get paid. And so I was among the things that I wish she had talked more about, as you guys consider this stuff going forward, think about staged funding alternatives, matching when you have bonds outstanding against when you actually need that, because obviously the less the amount of time you have bonds outstanding, the lower the interest cost that attaches to that for the district. There were no conversations, and it's not Liz's position to talk about things, non-bond related funding sources for capital projects. We've had significant surplus buildup in this district over the last 3 years. We have a $2 million low point balance in the O&M fund, $2.5 million more in the working capital fund. So some consideration to, as well, the likelihood of additional surplus funds is real as well. Excuse me. The other thing that I think is important is that there were technical aspects that were covered tonight that will need additional opinions and additional work. In particular, whether or not you can apply those TIF revenues to commingled bond issues. Not only will your counsel, Hodges, but bond counsel, Chapman and Cutler, will probably have to opine on that. Additionally, the village and their counsel may have some opinions about how those TIF revenues actually get applied. If it was the village's intention that as dollars came in, then they would fund capital projects, you'll need to clarify that, as well as whether or not, stored up capital projects, and if so, from what point? What point do the capital dollars spent at Manning count towards the TIF dollars? So a number of technical questions that go on, and I think the important thing that I want to communicate with this is this. There are a lot of questions involved in the questions you're going to be wrestling with over the next several months. And if the only advice you've gotten is from the party that's paid to sell bonds, you may have a, perception problem attached to that. Beyond that, we play our arch rival Lyle this Friday at Lyle out at Benedictine. It's a great facility to watch a football game. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments?
Donna Risden. I had a few comments on the antenna proposal. 2 questions for the consultants I didn't have addressed were, what would the size of this mammoth flag for this mammoth pole be, and who would maintain that flag? And then I think it behooves them to ask the bank, as a Bank of America customer, they've closed their drive-through building and they're not using it, so this may be a great location for all this equipment. As a parent of walkers, and the Norfolk Street is the main walking route for our children, I would like to see 6-foot stakes and drawn out 18 by 10 feet, and I would like everyone to come and see arrival and dismissal and that area plotted. We're taking up green space. If we go forward with the facility committee recommendations, you're going to be cutting area across the street, taking away from the basketball courts. We have area in the playground that is unusable because it's a mudslide mound. I would really like you guys, sorry, nervous, to take a look at that. And also, a question from another parent. I think I answered it. Okay, that wraps it up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining, personnel issues, student discipline, and probable litigation.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Notbush?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
And there will not be a vote after close. Thank you.